First of all, I just want to thank both of you for taking time out of what I know is extremely busy schedule. It's busy no matter what, but obviously, particularly in this time and under the challenges that investigators face on a daily basis, I know there's so much going on, but I do appreciate you taking the time to talk to our community about a few things. And so what I wanted to first do is introduce both of our panel folks today. Greg Monahan is the Supervisory Special Agent, the Cybercrimes Unit of IRS in Washington, D.C., and he's joined by Chris Janczewski, and Chris is a special agent. He's in the Pittsburgh area, and Greg is going to give us a sense of some of the priorities of the IRS in the cyberspace. And Chris is kind enough, he's going to talk about a couple of cases that he's been involved in, and we'll follow up with some questions regarding that. And I also should just say, starting off, Chris, I know that you've been nominated for a government-wide award for your work, so interested in talking to you about that in a bit. But again, gentlemen, thanks so much. And Greg, if you don't mind, if we could start with you and talk a bit about some of the challenges that I know you're all facing. We've been able to talk to some of your colleagues in the past, but also specifically regarding cyber and what we need to be worried about and paying attention to in the AML community.
John, I really appreciate the opportunity, both Chris and I. Thank you so much for having us today. What I'd like to do, John, if it's okay, is just spend a minute or two and talk briefly about our agency and what it is that we do for those folks out there that might not know more about IRS and especially in the criminal investigation space.
So, that'd be perfect. Yeah, please do.
Thanks, John. So IRSCI, we are the law enforcement arm of the Internal Revenue Service, and we have sole jurisdiction over tax crimes. But we also conduct criminal investigations into money laundering, Bank Secrecy Act violations, and other related financial crimes. So basically a financial nexus, and if there's a criminal activity, we can investigate that. So CI special agents, we're sworn federal law enforcement officers. We have the authority to arrest, conduct search, do seizures. We have firearm authority, similar to our counterparts with such as FBI, DEA, Homeland Security investigations, and other law enforcement agencies in the U.S. government. CI special agents are widely considered to be the best financial investigators in the U.S. government. And as such, we are typically brought into most every significant investigation conducted by the U.S. attorney's offices around the country. And because there's a significant financial component to every cybercrime, as are normally crimes of profit, IRSCI is called upon. We're well suited and we're up to the task for following the money around the world, whether it's fiat currency or cryptocurrency. So in CI, we have 21 field offices around the country. We also have 10 international posts. So the international posts are more of a liaison position where we are meeting and greeting with our international law enforcement counterparts to conduct investigations overseas, which in cybercrimes is almost every investigation that we conduct. As it relates to cybercrimes, each of our field offices has at least one cybercrimes coordinator who's responsible for their geographic area. Most of our field offices have several special agents who specialize in cyber crimes. So IRSCI operates two separate cybercrimes units. I manage the one here in Washington, D.C. We also have a cybercrimes unit out in Los Angeles as well. Within the cybercrimes unit community between the two offices, we have highly trained and skilled special agents. We have cyber engineers, cyber forensic specialists who conduct these significant cybercrimes investigations. So typically, when you take a look at the cybercrimes units, the cases that we're working on are the most complex, egregious, often international cybercrimes investigations. So investigations that are in the darknet market space, such as Liberty Reserve, Silk Road, Alphabay, Wall Street Market, and most recently, Welcome to Video. As you mentioned, Chris Janczewski was the lead case agent on this investigation. Welcome to Video is one of the largest child exploitation investigations in U.S. history, but we also investigate virtual currency exchanges, those that are operating nefariously or potentially they have been hacked, such as Mt. Gox, BTCE, and also Bitcoin tumbling operations. So typically, what we face is the anonymity of the darknet and typically virtual currency in general. And most law enforcement agencies around the globe that are fighting this really have an uphill battle. But with the expertise that we bring with following the money, that definitely suits us, because at the end of the day, the money always leads us back to the criminal. And because we have a knack for that, we typically do amazing work in that space. But I'd say that for the most part, John, I think that, darknet markets, the onion router, the area in which most of these cyber criminals are operating, if they have good operational security, it makes it very, very difficult with law enforcement in terms of figuring out who these bad guys are and how they're operating. So I'd say that, it takes a village. Truly, it's not just the law enforcement community that's working with each other. We're looking to the intel community as well, the intelligence community. We're looking at the financial institutions around the globe, because typically with financial crimes, in particular with virtual currency, we're looking for the on-ramps and on-ramps in terms of virtual currency, which is the financial institutions. So having the relationships with the banks around the world is very important.
It's interesting, Greg. Today, Director of FinCEN, Ken Blanco, gave a virtual speech to the Consensus Blockchain Conference, and called you guys out specifically for the good partnering that FinCEN does with IRS, but also your point that financial institutions are so important in this area, just given all the explosion of virtual currency over the past, whatever it's been, 5 to 10 years or whatever. So the notion that you folks are working side by side is really important to us in the private sector. So I know that's important. You mentioned the FBI and other law enforcement partners. If you wouldn't mind, just a quick minute or two about partnering with your folks within the government, because I think I understand that. I don't think we always understand that it's not a competition. It's something that if you have the expertise, you're going to share that with an agent and another agency and vice versa. And that's so important to being successful, right?
Oh, John, you very well said. Look, at the end of the day, the cyber criminals are all working together. That puts us at a disadvantage, especially when it comes to international investigations. Cyber is a very dynamic, very, very fast type of crime, especially when it comes to the movement of virtual currency. And if we're not, working together collaboratively, we're really lost. And so the collaboration with other key partners, not just in law enforcement, but outside of law enforcement, is really critical. Working with the virtual currency exchanges around the globe, nobody wants to be seen as, facilitating proceeds of crime, unless, of course, you're a criminal. And so the relationships that we've established overseas and domestically as well is really second to none. And it really takes that collaboration to get this type of work done and have success. So kudos to all the men and women around the world that are fighting this fight, because without them, we wouldn't be doing such a great job.
I think that's right. Blanco also said in his prepared remarks that since 2013, that FinCEN's received over 70,000 SARs involving virtual currency exploitation. So obviously the scope just continues to challenge. I'm going to come back to you in a few moments, Greg. I want to go to Chris. Chris, so a couple things. If you could talk a bit about this most recent case. It's been called the largest dark web child pornography site in the world. How you got engaged with it, I don't mean in terms of as an agent, but just how it came on your radar, or your guys' radar, to work this, and if you can give us some insight into how it went down.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So in 2015, when we started the cybercrimes unit, it was a pretty broad jurisdiction. I know you've spoken to Chief Fort before, and he's been great about kind of giving us very lenient with the constraints that we have. Really, our kind of marching orders are just to be involved in the most impactful cases that we can get involved in, that have one, financial component, and two, some level of cyber nexus. And so it was around 2017, and a person who's very involved in the kind of virtual currency ecosystem had reached out and said, here's this website on the darknet. It sells child pornography videos in exchange for Bitcoin. And I remember thinking, like, well, surely there's somebody that does this already. And turns out there wasn't really somebody. It was now us to go about it. And so while I might have been kind of naive at first to think of the impact this case would have, in retrospect, it's been a truly rewarding experience and obviously a great result. So really, it was just kind of was. For example, on the site, it said itself, do not upload adult porn. Like, it was very clear. If not for child pornography, this website does not exist. And basically how it worked is that you paid in Bitcoin to obtain points, and you could then redeem the points to download the child pornography videos. And when we ultimately took it down, there were, I think, around 8 terabytes worth of videos. Each video was unique as far as a hash function. And so it was pretty significant. I think the website itself had boasted over having 1 million downloads. And, you know, you're obviously familiar with it. That resulted in over 300 arrests worldwide. And then, of course, the number we're most proud of is the 25 children that actually been rescued, which, you know, in hindsight, it's just amazing to think that, like, studying accounting, going to a tax agency, and then end up being involved in a case where real lives are impacted.
So you guys got a tip.
It's just amazing to think about.
Enabled you to start looking into this. What can we glean in the financial sector in terms of I know it's a hack phrase, but red flags and other indicators and things like that? Maybe it's not a child pornography site, but it's another illegal use of the internet, if you will. So what did you learn from that, Chris, that we can translate to our community to be on the lookout for certain types of activities that could, you know, be something? Obviously file a SAR, perhaps contact somebody like yourself. What did you learn from this case?
Yeah, so it seems with virtual currency, in my opinion, it's always about the context. Like, you can see definitively that address A sends to address B this amount on this date. It's on the blockchain. Everybody agrees that's correct. But once you start adding the context to it, as much like any other type of transaction, is when it sticks out more. And so we saw that oftentimes individuals were sending to other websites that may have been identified as having connections. So whether that's a darknet market or another type of child exploitation website. Oftentimes the payments we could see, so you may see only one payment coming from this person, but if you look to see the recipient address has similar amounts from people all over in different places, you might think that that's, again, some type of service that's being transacted here, as opposed to just, like, you know, the transfer of Bitcoin for an investment or something. I don't know. So those certainly stuck out. I think that anytime you can kind of engage somebody and question them, that is pretty significant. I was surprised and delighted, of course, I guess, that for all of HSI, when they would go and approach the clients of the website, I would say like 9 out of 10 times there would be a confession. Whether the HSI agents are just that good, which I'll just assume that they are, or if there is some type of reason that these people felt obligated to just come forward with the truth. It seems like with just a little bit of prodding.
Are there other cyber-related cases that maybe have a different, not a different outcome, but we could also learn from that you've been involved in, or maybe just high level, even if the cases aren't finished yet, that you can discuss?
Yeah, another one that we had that was public in, I believe, February of this year. It was mostly the same team as the Welcome to Video investigation. It had to do with North Korean state actors hacking virtual currency exchanges. I think we identified 3 or 4 of them within the forfeiture complaint, which your listeners can Google DOJ. And one of the targets that we charged was a Chinese money launderer, Yin, Y-I-N. And similar situation, we were notified that here is this exchange. It was hacked. This is the money, the virtual currency that was stolen. We leave it up to you to find out where it went and who's behind it. We were contacted by a victim who had a virtual currency exchange, and they had lost a few $100 million worth of virtual currency, and said this is the funds that were stolen, and basically left it up to us to then follow it and see what's behind it. It was layered through thousands of transactions that we commonly refer to as peel chains. It was layered at different virtual currency exchanges, some of which the hackers provided fake know your customer documentation. And some of it you could tell just by looking at the picture, like, this is not right. Some of it was a little better than that. And then ultimately it was laundered with Chinese money launderers that were acting as over-the-counter traders. So basically like their own exchanges, but they're just hosted at a couple larger exchanges.
Greg, if you don't mind, I'd like to come back to you. Whenever we have these conversations with our great partners like you folks, always looking for some general takeaways for the AML community. So based on what Chris was able to discuss and you up front, what are some things, you're looking at a community of folks. We know that cyber is important, but many of us are not cyber experts. So it's a question of obviously internally in your institutions, working with the divisions, your IT departments, your information security folks. But besides that, how would you recommend we stay as current as we can in an area that obviously continues, sadly, to grow and become more challenging?
That's a great question, John. Look, I think first and foremost, the outreach has got to be there. Having contact with law enforcement makes a significant effort. I know we do in IRSCI. I know the other law enforcement agencies do as well, to do outreach and to sit down face to face. And obviously in COVID-19, that's difficult to do today. But, as this breaks, getting on the telephone, talking about some of the more current issues and problems that we might be seeing in law enforcement. Because if we're not communicating this out to the impacted individuals, mostly AML folks in financial institutions, then we're really doing a disservice, because the first line of defense is with the financial institutions. And so what I'd say is, in cyber, especially in cyber, when you follow the process of, somebody in the AML department of a big bank identifies a potential suspicious activity, they go through the process of reporting it, doing an SAR, submitting it to FinCEN, it gets filed. It could be a number of weeks, even months, by the time somebody in law enforcement actually sees that. So I think that communication, if there's a way that we can speed that up, especially if it's something significant, to have a direct line to law enforcement to say, hey, you might want to have a look at this, because, back in the day when we're looking at financial crimes and money's moving around the globe, we usually have a little bit of a window there to freeze the funds and then turn around and potentially seize those. With virtual currency, if we're not reacting within seconds, it's gone. And so I'd say that the communication flow between the direct impacted financial institutions, especially, and law enforcement has to have a really strong relationship there. And I like to say that we do, especially with virtual currency. We're very much on the front lines with our virtual currency exchanges here in America and also abroad, and the banks that are associated with those virtual currency exchanges as well. So clearly, it's that old saying, if you see something, say something. Well, it's true. Oftentimes if we're writing it down and doing a report, by the time it gets filed and gets into the right hands, it's way too late to actually do something about it. So I think having that relationship is very important.
Yeah, I can't disagree at all. Obviously, communication is always a key in our world, and we've been fortunate in the anti-money laundering space that the IRS, CI folks have always been great partners, and that continues to this day. And obviously, we have partners with other law enforcement agencies. But I will tell you, from talking to our peers and colleagues in the financial institutions, they say there's nothing like having a relationship, being able to, even in this day and age, pick up the phone. A SAR has been filed, but we want to tell you a little bit more about the information. So I think that becomes pretty important. Chris, I know we had a little bit of audio issues, but I do want to end by congratulating you. I know that your work in the case that you mentioned is being acknowledged, and I would just mention that not enough, I think, in our world do the law enforcement successes get recognized. So we hope things getting nominated is half the game, I'm sure. To join IRS, having a background in accounting and those spaces are important, but cyber it's not new, but it's relatively new. So how did you yourself make sure that you stayed up to date with all the latest issues so that you can be an effective investigator like you are?
Yeah, I think that really it's just kind of like immersion. If I was to move to Mexico, I feel like I'd probably pick up Spanish much quicker than if I just sat at home and tried to read a book about it. Being around great people that are very intelligent, our agency did a good job of bringing people who had some background in cyber, but more importantly, were just like great people who wanted to work hard, brought them to DC and put them all together to try and tackle some of these issues. And so that's been like something that's been truly rewarding. And I just kind of, I don't know, have somewhat of a tenacity to try and stay after these things.
Thanks for what you do each and every day and taking the time to share some of this with us. Like I said, we will put links to these cases that you mentioned. And of course, we always put the IRS website up there so people can access that and that information. But both of you, thanks so much for what you do. And thanks for taking the time today.
John, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And especially the outreach that we have with the community. So anything you need ever in the future, just let us know. Thank you again.